So I was on one of the Blender Discord forums earlier today and yesterday, and someone had a setup using a spring, and they were using dynamics, rigid bodies to drive the spring, but then they were having all kinds of problems moving the spring around, scaling it up, because it's basically driven by dynamics. So all the transformations for the objects won't necessarily translate down to the shapes. So I wanted to just go through this simple tutorial of creating a spring and driving it using a simple armature and a bone structure using IK. So first, let's create a spring. Now, I don't have a script in here or any tools to create springs, so I'm just going to use the things that are in Blender. Okay, so I'm going to rotate this about 45 degrees on the z-axis. Going to Control A, freeze the scale, or sorry, freeze the rotation. And then I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees again on the x-axis and freeze the rotation. Then I'm going to my front view, and I'm going to scale this up a little bit so we'll get a sort of a thicker spring. And then again, freeze my scale. Going to select its vertices in edit mode, and then just move it on the axis out a little bit to the right. Let's say, yeah, maybe 50 units out or so. Okay. And now go back to object mode. I'm going to apply the screw modifier and then set the screw offset so that it gives me sort of a little coil here. We have the beginnings of a spring, and then we can increase the iterations. And there we go. We have a spring now. Fairly simple, easy way to create a spring. Now, if you actually want to do more with it, of course, you're going to have to do something like you apply the screw, and then it's basically a mesh. So now you can edit it. Okay. You can close your ends, you can smooth it, you can do all kinds of nifty things with it. I will apply some subdivision to this just to round it out a little bit so it looks a little nicer on screen. Okay, so now I want to be able to control this thing. So what I've done in the past is I've gone in edit mode, selected one of the edges, usually the topmost edge, and I'll just select it all the way through the entire thing, and then I'll shift D so that I basically get a separate edge. And then while that edge is selected, I will separate selection so that it becomes a completely separate object. And that in my little outline over here will appear just like that. And I can delete my subdivision from that one because I just need the object. And now in my front view, I'm going to go in the wireframe mode. And then I'm going to edit. I'm going to select all. And then I'm just going to pull this down so it's sort of centered inside of my activate my selectable option. I'm going to make the spring itself not selectable. Okay, so now what I need is I need a way to basically control the spring. And this curve is going to serve sort of part of that purpose. This is sort of based on something that you can do in a program called Maya, where you can create sort of a spline IK and it'll automatically generate a curve. And then that curve will actually be weighted, or the mesh will be weighted to sort of follow that curve. But this, we're just going to use just the bones of an armature. So Shift A, going to create an armature. Okay, it'll create your first bone. And it usually creates it so it's only a couple of, like a single meter long. I'll make it, let's say 10. So it's easy for us to see. Okay, so that's going to be my starter. I'm actually going to hide my spring so I can just see my curve. I'm going to edit. I'm going to select that bone. And then I'm going to go up here and I'm going to activate Let's try snap to vertex, or let's do snap to edge. We'll see how that works out. And yeah, I'll just activate that. Shift tab to activate that from the keyboard. And then I'm going to move. I'm going to see how that snaps. And so that's snapping to the curve nicely. But I want it to snap a little more specific than that. So I'm going to try vertex instead, and we'll see how this works out. And yeah, that's more like what I want. And so now I'm going to grab the end of this. So I snap the base of it, or the beginning of it to here. I'm going to snap the tail to the next vertex. Or let's jump a few vertices here just to save time. So I'm going to snap it, say, to here, and then extrude, pressing E on the keyboard. And then I'm going to jump, say, let's say another 3. Oh, hold on. Okay, let's go there. And extrude again and go there. And as you can see, what I'm doing is I'm basically going to try and put at least 4 bones around each bend. And I'm just going to follow the curve up just like this. Okay. And I'm probably using more bones than I really need, but I'm going to do it anyway. And it's not all that arduous a task, so I can just keep going around and doing this. Shouldn't take you more than 2 or 3 minutes to do it, unless you're talking to a microphone like I am. And so I'm just going to pause the recording so we can jump ahead. Okay, so now I have all of my bones following the curve all the way up and down. And it was pretty easy to do. So, good idea before you actually start making your bones. Label the first bone something specific, like if you're going to call it, say, spring 01 or something like that. Label the first bone and then start extruding so that it automatically labels all your other bones. If you forgot, like I did, select all your bones, and then you can just sort of do a batch rename. Make sure you choose bones in the batch rename tool. And you can do a find and replace, or you can simply do a set name, and you're giving it a new name under method, and I'll just call it spring. And that should be good. Unless you're doing a left and right spring or something like that. If you're doing a left spring, then you want to do spring.l for left, and it'll automatically number it after the first one, or you can do .l001 or something like that. But I'm just going to do spring.001. And since it can't name them all the same, it'll automatically increment the number. Okay, and so I've got about 20 bones, and it should rename them all. And see, the last one is 020. Perfect. Okay. So now I have my bones, and they should be lined up perfectly with my mesh, which they are. And I know some of you are asking, okay, why don't I just make a straight chain of bones instead of making all of these? Because I want this to look like it's behaving like a spring. And it can't do that if I'm just having it follow the bend of a straight chain. So I needed one that was essentially in the shape of a spring. And let's see, let me just change the way this is viewing and put the bones in front so we can have a closer look at them. And we're going to switch the mode just temporarily. There we go. So we've got our bones. We'll select all these and scale them up a little bit. Now, one thing I like to do with bones in general is I will zero out the rotation, the roll on all of them. So Alt-R to zero out the roll. And this way we get sort of a nice consistent flow of our chain, consistent orientation as well. Orientation is very important, especially when it comes to rigging. Okay, so now I want to add, let's say I want to add an IK on here. I'm going to need a couple of different things. So I've got my main bone chain, correct? And that's the one that's going to control all of the skin weights. So now what I want to do is I want to create another bone. I'm just going to take this end here. I'm just going to extrude, go straight up, and just pull straight up like this. And I'm going to take this one. I'm going to right click, parent clear. Okay, it's completely clear. And I'm going to move it so that it aligns with grid 0, or whatever I want the center of my spring to be, essentially. So that's what we want to do. So let's take the head of it, move it to 0, take the tail, move to 0 on the X. Okay, and I think everything else is centered nicely. So that should be fine. And we can take the head as well on the Z and put that at 0. So we've got one there, and then we can duplicate that. And we can move it straight up to the top and put that, let's say, right here. Okay, and so I'm going to take the base of my spring, shift select that first joint that I duplicated and centered. I'm just going to control P to parent it, connecting it with offset. And I'm going to take the one that's floating up here and control P as well, connecting with offset. Okay, and what I'm doing here is I'm actually scaling the bone. When you actually switch to B bone, you can actually scale them so that you can see these different variations. Makes it a little easier to pick things out as opposed to just doing the regular joint view. And you can do that under, what was it? Armature transform, and it's scale bone. I assigned a quick key to it. So I'm using a hotkey. Alt X is my hotkey for that one because nothing else is using it. And I like to use these to create controllers. And so these are going to be my controlling elements. They're not going to be have any deformation influence. I'm going to go to each bone, select it, and uncheck deform. Okay, so now we're pretty much set, except I want to rename this one. I'm going to rename this one at the bottom. I'm going to call that my root, and I'll call the one at the top my spring end. Okay. So last but not least, I'm going to switch to pose mode. So pose mode, I have a hotkey set for that one as well. I use Control Alt P because again, it's not being used. That combination of keys isn't used by anything else. And so now I want to set it up so that essentially this is the end of my chain, and I want it to basically be pulled by this bone here. So I'm going to select my bone and add a bone constraint. And I want to add an IK, inverse kinematics. You can also just do a Shift I, and you can do 2 empty objects, or you can do without targets. I usually do without targets. That way I can choose my own targets. And target is armature, and bone I want it to target is the end. And as you can see, that sort of throws out a whack there a bit. And that's because this bone, the end of it's way over here, but I want it to be controlled from the center. So a couple things you need to do here. So what I could do is I could take this last bone, I could extrude out one more. Extrude out one more, and I'll snap the end to the center here. Okay. At which point I can go back into pose mode, and I delete this constraint, and I move it to this bone. I could have just copied it over, but let's do it cleanly. Okay, so put that there, armature, bone, and we'll try this again. And it stays perfect, okay? And you can add a pole vector here. As a matter of fact, you probably should. Let me turn off snapping and we'll test this out. Okay, and look at that. Perfect spring. And the great thing about this spring is you can scale it, move it around without causing anything to freak out. And let's test it out here one more time. Now, this bone at the end here, I don't want it to have any influence, so I'm going to kill the deformation on that one, because that's sort of another tail or an end. Then I should be able to take my geometry, reactivate selection for it, select the bones, automatic weights, and I'll probably have to do a little bit of cleanup, but it should mostly work. So there I go. I need to do a little cleanup to get rid of some of the secondary influences from the bones below it, but otherwise it's mostly there. So you preserve volume and we'll move it ahead of the smoothing. That should also help. Yeah, it's definitely working much better. And like I said, I still need to go in and tweak some weights, but it's actually easy to do so since there are actually so few, and you can easily see where you don't want the influence. And I can select vert mode there for weights, choose my selection tool, go transparent, and then I can just easily come in and select these sections that are sort of being influenced by bones they shouldn't be influenced by, and I can just go through them and remove influence to clean things up. So 19 shouldn't be affecting anything below it. And so it's going to be very easy to clean this up. Just go through the bones like so and remove influence where it doesn't need to be. You could even go in and clean it up a little bit later. But essentially, this is a simple way to create a nice little spring. So now that we have our spring all weighted, we can test it and we can see that everything stretches evenly. The deformation looks really good. I've set the skin weights at about 0.5 at the intersection of every bone. So basically both bones on either side of the intersection have 0.5 influence over it. So we need to set that for each bone. Okay, so now that we know that all the weights are good, if you want to, you can come in and you can set a limit on how many bones are actually influence the entire structure. This one has about 21, 22 bones. But let's say we want the bottom to remain kind of flat. So you want that bone at the very bottom to stay flat. You can basically just reduce the limit of bones influenced. So I have to set this one to what, 20 or 21. And so now you can see when I pull it, that bottom bone remains flat with the root. And so it looks a bit more. Of course, you can also add a pole vector if you want to. And I'm pretty much just going to name that the spring aim. And so if I actually go into the IK constraint here, and I tell it it's pulling that from the armature, and then I tell it spring aim. Now you can see it actually causes it to flip out a little bit. And you basically just need to go in and find the position that matches or gets as close to the original position as possible. And so when you can need to go in and edit the armature and reposition the default place for that bone in that location, or you could even reset the rest pose for the entire armature to lock that in. Basically, you just need to get locked in place and you're pretty much done. And I usually parent that bone, that aim bone, to the end that I'm pulling it from if I wanted to follow that, or you can do it to the root. Just depends on where you want to put it. And you can use that to adjust the spring if you ever need to in the future.